Today we are continuing our discussion on hell, and we've covered two sessions so far, and the first two sessions really didn't talk about hell at all. They talked about God, about the God of hell, if you will, what God is like, what his nature is, what his predisposition is to be merciful. We talked about God being like Jesus because God is Jesus, and that he is the God of hell, behind hell. Satan is not in charge of hell. Hell is something that is God's doing, not anyone else's. And so we ask the question, does it make sense that Jesus, from what we know of him, would torment someone for eternity? Because A, they didn't believe the right thing. B, they didn't invite Jesus into their heart as Lord and Savior, or they weren't baptized, or whatever religious thing we want to list. Or are we willing to say that the Jesus we know, the person of Jesus Christ, who taught us to love our enemies, to forgive those who sin against us, to carry the cloak of the one who oppresses us, go the extra mile, that he would choose to create a place to torture people forever for whatever reason? Is that the nature of God? We also saw that there are three basic views of what hell is all about. The most popular one currently in the West, in America, in evangelicalism, and even in the Catholic tradition, the most popular one currently is what is called eternal conscious torment, that someone dies without Christ and they go to hell and are tortured forever. The second view is called annihilationism, that when that person dies, they simply cease to exist, that hell, if you will, is a burning up completely of that person. And the third view is that hell is itself a cleansing fire, a purifying experience, that the goal of hell, that there is a goal of hell, that the goal is not simply eternal torment, but the goal is to bring about wholeness, healing, purifying in the person who experiences it, so that they are ultimately united with Christ, united with God. Kind of like a doctor saying, this is going to hurt, but it's for your own good. Having to cut away something so that you can be whole. That's what we've talked about so far. Tonight and next week, I'm going to delve into what the Bible actually says, what the scriptures say about hell. Before I do, I need to say one more time that words are important. Someone, I don't remember who, someone once said that words are like cars on a train, that they carry different cargo. From the outside you look and it looks the same, but maybe it has corn in it, or maybe it has coal in it. It changes as it moves along the track and picks up one load and drops off another load. Words are like that too. Words mean different things to different people, so definitions are important. We have to explain what we mean. So if I say God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son for the sake of the world. Well, Jesus says that, John 3:16. On the other hand, 1 John chapter 2, verse 15 says, do not love the world. Wait, for God so loved the world, John 3:16, 1 John 2:15, do not love the world or anything in the world. But wait, would God love the world? Aren't we supposed to be like God? I mean, shouldn't we? Oh, and then we all, in our head, we all think, oh, wait a minute. That's two different meanings. It's the same word, but world in 1 John means something different from world in John 3:16. So when I say the word hell, what does that mean? What do you think? What we think, probably everybody watching it, what we are geared to automatically go to is a place of eternal torture. Even if we don't believe that, even if we're moving away from that, that's where our minds go, because it's been so a part of us for so long, and it's where even non-Christians, even people that don't believe in anything in our culture, they say, go to hell. And they don't mean go to some place of cleansing and purifying and being brought into union with God. That's not what they mean. So hell, what do you mean when you say hell? Is it a place of darkness? Is it a place of the absence of God's presence? Is it a place of torment? For the moment, for the sake of tonight, let's go with that. Let's go with hell as it is popularly understood, the place of eternal torment. The place where after death the wicked go and are tormented. What does the Bible say about hell? That's what we're talking about tonight. First of all, the Old Testament, from Genesis, the writings of Moses, the historic books, the poetry books, the wisdom books, the prophetic books, the whole Old Testament, from beginning to end, teaches us nothing about hell. Hell simply isn't there. Now here's what's very, very, very important for us to understand. Starting with the Old Testament, there is no concept of a place of torture after life. There is no concept in the Old Testament of someone dying and going to the bad place. There is a word in the Old Testament, the Hebrew word Sheol. It is used 64 times in the Old Testament, but it simply means death, or the grave, or the place of death, or the state of being dead. It isn't a word about torment or punishment. The Old Testament has no concept of someone dying and being punished after death. Not there. That may come as a shock to some of you. Dig in, study it for yourself. Sheol, and yet that word Sheol gets translated in the King James Version and in many English translations. It gets translated, you guessed it, hell. Even if I make my bed in hell, David says in the Psalms, you are there. And when we read the word hell, we picture, oh, my Lord, David making his bed in flames and torture and fire. No. He's saying, even if I make my bed in the grave, even if I die, even in my state of death, you are there. David had no reference for a place of torment, nor did Moses or any of the others. The later prophets used that term Sheol for what we would call biting the dust. Another one bites dust. Going down in chaos, falling apart, collapsing, biting the dust, losing the fight. And so that word is used figuratively in the prophets for that. but it means in the Old Testament the condition of being dead, period. The Old Testament says nothing about hell as we understand it. So let's talk about what the New Testament says. When we come to the New Testament, and this is where I'm about to split it into two parts. I'm going to go part 1 tonight, part 2 tomorrow. When we come to the New Testament, there are 3 words that get translated hell. You know, and I think we've even talked about this in this series or the previous series, that there are 4 words for love. Agape, eros, storge, phileo. They all get translated love, but they don't all mean the same thing. Agape is selfless love. Storge is family love. Eros is romantic love. Phileo is brotherly love. So I can tell a man, I love you, and it's not the same as me telling a woman that I'm madly in love with, I love you. But we use the same word. The Greeks use 4 different words to express precisely what they meant. Well, there are 3 different words in Greek that get translated hell. The first is one I'm going to talk about tonight. Hades. Now, you're going to get a word lesson tonight, but it's a very important one to help us understand this idea of hell. What's the Old Testament word? Sheol. What would Jesus have used in his native tongue? Sheol. What would St. Paul have used as a Jew, a Pharisee of the tribe of Benjamin in his native tongue? Sheol. Sheol, what does it mean? Place of the dead. Period. But the New Testament, neither the Gospels nor the epistles of Paul or any of the rest of it, the New Testament is not written in Hebrew. It is not written to the Hebrew reader. The New Testament is written in Greek. It's not written just to the Jews. It's written to Gentiles around the world. It's written to Jews far from Israel who don't even speak their native language anymore. Greek was the lingua franca. It was the language of the world at that time. So, when St. Paul quotes the Old Testament, "You will not leave my soul in Sheol," what word is he going to use so that Greek readers understand? Well, the word the New Testament uses to translate Hebrew Sheol, place of the dead, the state of being dead, into Greek, the word the New Testament uses is Hades. It's used 17 times in the New Testament. Here's an example. Matthew chapter 11, verse 23. "And thou, Capernaum, which art exalted unto heaven, shalt be brought down to hell," down to the grave, down to destruction, down to the dust. The word is Hades, down to Hades. Let me tell you about this word Hades for the rest of the night. If you were going to go evangelize Vikings, and you're trying to figure out how to communicate to the Vikings in their own language and in their own conceptual ideas, you're trying to communicate the gospel to them, and you're trying to tell the Vikings about heaven. What's the Viking word for heaven? How can I tell these people about heaven? About what Christ is going to bring them, that he's going to bring them the kingdom of heaven. Let's see what, oh, I know, I'll use the Viking word Valhalla. That's the Viking word for heaven. But wait a minute. The Viking word for heaven, the Viking concept of Valhalla, is completely different than the Christian concept of heaven. Valhalla is a place of drunkenness and loose women and fighting just for the hell of it. So if you were going to evangelize the Vikings and you're telling them about heaven and you use the word Valhalla to try to communicate with them something about the afterlife, they already have this entire mythology behind them of what Valhalla is. And when you use that word, you got to deal with all that thinking. You with me? So Paul has to use a word to translate Sheol, Hebrew for place of the dead, state of being dead. Not torture, not torment, just death. He's got to find a word, and he latches on to the word Hades, which is already an important word in Greek mythology. Hades is, first of all, a god. And he is the god of the underworld in Greek mythology. He's not depicted very much because Hades means the unseen or the invisible one. And he's not depicted very much in Greek art because he's invisible. He lives in the underworld. He almost never comes out of the underworld. But sometimes, this is fun, sometimes when he is depicted in Greek art, you remember Poseidon? Poseidon, the god of the sea, he carries a trident, the three-pronged spear. Hades carries a two-pronged, what we would call pitchfork. How that makes it into Christian artwork and thinking of the devil with a pitchfork is fascinating, but the Greek god Hades, the god of the underworld, the unseen one, when he is depicted, sometimes carries a pitchfork. And then his name became associated with his place, with the underworld, with the realm of the dead. In Greek mythology, like in Hebrew thinking, when you die, whether you are good or bad, you go to Hades. You enter into the realm of the dead. That's where the Hebrews stop. The Greeks go on from there and get very involved, and there are two separate regions in Hades. This is Greek, not Hebrew, not Christian, Greek mythology. There are two, and there are, I think, 7 rivers that flow through Hades, and there are portals, there are doors, gates, at various places on the earth, like literally where if you go to this place, there's a gate to hell, a gate to Hades, where you can go down into the underworld. Just like, remember when Jacob wrestled with God and he named the place the gates of heaven. Well, there are gates of the underworld. But, back to the point. Hebrew theology stops with that. Greek theology develops, or Greek mythology develops, this massive structure of story. And so there's Hades, which is the place of the dead. But in Hades, first of all, you have to cross the river. You have to get in a boat and cross the river of death, the Styx River, and you have to pay a gold coin to get across that river. So sometimes when they buried people, they would put a gold coin on their tongue. And if you weren't properly buried, you couldn't cross that river. But, where was I? Oh, once you crossed over, there's another God in charge, a kind of under God, in charge of determining where you're going to go. And there are different parts of Hades. There is the part of Hades where there is suffering and torture and torment. That's called Tartarus. And then there are other parts of Hades where good people go that aren't so bad. In fact, that aren't bad at all. In fact, some of them are absolutely delightful. The Elysian Fields is one of those places that if you're good enough and you lived a life of charity and good works and caring for others, you get to end up there and stay there forever. The ultimate place was in Greek mythology was called the Isle of the Blessed. And some Greeks believed in a kind of reincarnation. And if you end up in Elysian Fields 3 times being reincarnated, then you get to go to the Isle of the Blessed and live there for eternity. How odd that Paul uses this word to translate Sheol. Because all of a sudden, everybody and their brother starts reading Hades, and they were raised with the Greek gods, and they think, oh, Hades, just like the Viking would think, oh, Valhalla. But none of that is what Paul meant. When Paul and the gospel writers use the word Hades, when Jesus uses the word Hades, it simply means the realm of the dead. And I'm going to leave you with that tonight. No, I'm not. I'm going to go on just a little bit more. Because I've already told you, the Old Testament says nothing about a place of torment. Nothing. So let's ask about the rest of the Bible, and then I'll stop. In the book of Acts, there are 7 sermons by the apostles and Stephen. Peter, Paul, and Stephen preach 7 sermons. Every one of these sermons is evangelistic. Some of them are to the Jews, some of them are to Gentiles. Every one of them is saying, Jesus died and rose again, and Jesus is Lord. Now, I have to tell you, I grew up in church. Not only did I grow up in church, I grew up a preacher's kid in church, in a Pentecostal church, which means, unlike most of you heathen, I didn't go to church on Sunday morning. I went to church on Sunday morning and Sunday night and Wednesday night and any other time the door was open. And if we had a special revival that lasted 2 weeks, I was there at every single one of them. I learned to sleep on the church pews. When I was a little kid, sometimes I would get left accidentally sleeping under a pew, and they would have to come back and get me. Church was my life. I cannot tell you how many sermons I heard about you need to get right with God because hell is awaiting and you are going to burn in hell forever. And those were considered evangelistic sermons. Now, you don't hear that kind of sermon much anymore, but you still run into it every once in a while where someone, a total stranger, comes up to you and says, if you were to die tonight, do you know where you would spend eternity? Why am I talking about all this? There are 7 apostolic sermons, all of them evangelistic, the only apostolic sermons we have in the book of Acts, not one single one of them mentions hell. Not one of them even tosses out the idea of where would you spend eternity. Not one. The apostles apparently were lousy evangelists. The book of Acts doesn't reference hell whatsoever. So, the Old Testament's let us down. The book of Acts has let us down. Let's finally, well, not finally, but hopefully, turn our attention to St. Paul, who wrote the bulk of the New Testament. Surely Paul is going to teach us a thing or two about hell. Do you know what Paul teaches us about hell? Nothing. Romans, 1st, 2nd Corinthians, the pastoral epistles, the prison letters, nothing. Wouldn't you think if hell is a place of everlasting agony and torment for people who don't accept Christ, wouldn't you think that Paul would mention it? Wouldn't you think that Acts would have had a sermon, somebody would have preached a sermon about it? I'm going to go out on thin ice for a minute, likely to maybe possibly offend someone. I am convinced that pastors that I know who preach hell as a place of eternal conscious torment don't really believe it deep down in their heart. And here's why. Let me give you an example, an analogy. If there were a 25-story apartment complex on fire right now, they came breaking through the doors and said, we need help rescuing people. There are people that are going to be burned to death. We would drop everything and we would go to that apartment place and we would do everything we could to rescue those people. Right? Haul water, blankets, climb up ladders, get little children down out of windows, whatever it took. And at no point in this whole evening, if someone came to us and said, you know, you look hungry, why don't you take a break and go get lunch? I'll drive you through McDonald's and you get a Coke and a Big Mac and then you can come back. No! Are you crazy? Every moment counts. There are people dying here. You would work at rescuing people until you collapsed. And that is an attempt to save people from physical death. If pastors really and truly believed with all their heart that there is this place of eternal conscious torment, if Christians, not just pastors, if Christians really and truly deeply believe this, and they believe that there were hospitals full of people dying tonight and slipping off into eternity without God and into eternal fire, eternal torture. Well, folks, if we really believe that, we would be equally as relentless in trying to rescue them. We would say, I don't have time to rest. I'll rest if I have to, but I don't have time. I'll eat something in a hurry. I've got to be down at that hospital. I got to be bringing people to Jesus. I got to save them from the clutches of hell. And at least there were a few evangelists back in the old days that seemed to believe that enough that they actually did that kind of thing. But I'm convinced that I don't personally know any that truly, deeply believe that. Or else they are simply hardened in their hearts lacking compassion for people they know are going to burn forever. But the thing is, the apostles never preached that, never taught that. The book of Acts doesn't say anything about it. The only thing Paul says in the entire Bible about Hades is in 1 Corinthians 15:55, where he says, Christ has triumphed over death, over Hades. That's it. That's it. The only thing Paul says about Hades is that Jesus whipped it. So, James, Jude, the epistles of John, the book of Hebrews, not a single mention of hell. Peter does mention hell in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 18. For Christ has suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. Listen, here's what Peter says about hell. In which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, to the spirits, Greek word tartarus, because they formerly did not obey when God patiently waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. But what this text says is that Jesus went and preached in hell, in the realm of the death, even in the prison of death. He went and proclaimed. And what's the only thing that Jesus ever proclaims? The good news, the gospel, the kingdom of heaven. Jesus went to hell and announced, I've triumphed. Follow me. And led captivity captive. Here's what the book of Revelation tells us about hell, and I'll stop with this. It mentions Hades 3 times. In chapter 1, it says that Christ holds the keys of hell. Rose from the dead, conquered hell. He has the keys now. Chapter 20, that in the end, Hades gives up the dead, that the realm of death will give up the dead. All who are in their graves shall rise. And finally, in chapter 20 also, it says that when it's all said and done, death itself and Hades, the realm of death, will be cast into the lake of fire. But the interesting thing is, Hades gives up its dead before it gets cast into the lake of fire. And that's all the book of Revelation has to say about Hades. So where in the world did we get all of our ideas about hell? Well, next week, I'm going to show you what Jesus said about hell, and he said a few things. And I'm going to show you furthermore where we get all our, I would say, wrong, silly, misguided ideas about hell. So, what was the point of tonight? The Old Testament doesn't have a concept of a place of torture. Paul doesn't mention a place of torture. The book of Acts don't mention a place of torture. The epistles don't mention a place of torture. In fact, the New Testament doesn't mention a place of torture. Except, we're going to hear some things from Jesus next week that at first glance sound like he's talking about a place of torture. And so we just peel off a label and stick it on it and call it hell. And that's not what Jesus was talking about. We'll see that next week. God bless you. See you in a week.